Hello, and thank you for joining us for this brief introduction to the Illinois Library Association 2020 legislative priorities and our upcoming series of library legislative meetups. My name is Diane Foote, and I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Library Association. I'm joined here by Derek Blada, ILA's legislative consultant, who, among other things, represents our interests in Springfield. Today's agenda will cover ILA's state and local legislative priorities, which are developed over the course of each fall in the ILA Public Policy and Advocacy Committees and approved by the ILA Executive Board in late November, as well as the cornerstone of ILA's Legislative Advocacy Program, our series of 8 library legislative meetup events taking place across the state each February. These events are designed to bring together librarians, library staff, library trustees, and elected officials to discuss issues of mutual concern as the legislative sessions get underway. The schedule, full details, and registration information is all available on the ILA website, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. But first, here's an introduction to ILA's legislative priorities. We'll start on the state level. Derek?
January 28 is the first session day in the second year of the 101st Illinois General Assembly. It's important to note that not every bill introduced by a legislator will be referred to committee for consideration. Both the House and Senate have a rule that say only appropriation bills or proposals that affect the state budget, emergency bills, and those that must be considered for various reasons will be sent to a committee for possible debate. As such, it's important for us to focus our agenda and work with supportive partners to advance it through the legislative process this year. So we will work with the Illinois Secretary of State to not only fully fund our grant programs found within his office budget, but lobby for an increase in the per capita and per student grant rates for public and school libraries. These budget line items haven't been increased in several years, and the spending power found within them has eroded over time as a result of inflation and increased library operation costs. But just as important as seeking additional dollar for those increased costs, it is just as, if not more important, to prevent additional spending obligations from being placed upon us, which will force you to stretch our limited funding even further. We will continue to oppose any unfunded mandate proposed by our legislators to prevent you from having to make decisions on whether to reduce or ultimately eliminate spending in one area of your budget to fund newly mandated obligations the legislature has placed upon us. The constant and reliable funding stream our libraries have is our property tax levy. And whether you live and your library is located in downtown Chicago, its suburbs, or in central or downstate Illinois, you know library patrons who feel their property tax bills are too high. The previous administration supported statewide property tax freezes, and we obviously opposed every attempt to do so because that's the main source of new local library revenue. And it's your job to manage the resources available to you in a responsible manner. We must remind our legislators, if any attempt to reform the property tax system in Springfield occurs, they must protect our ability to raise local funds for local spending. Libraries are simply the best example of responsible spending for the greatest good. Our legislators must work to protect your ability to provide the services that your board believes are appropriate for your library to offer. 2 years ago, a change to the Public Library District Act was signed into law, which establishes basic election requirements for future trustees. But those requirements were not included in the Local Library Act. So we will ask our legislature to consider a bill to establish the same election requirements for all library trustees, which include a 1-year residency requirement before a person can be eligible to serve as trustee, and being current on any property tax obligations owed to our local governments. We also support a task force to study and recommend ways to build strong media literacy competencies for our elementary and high school students. A resolution was introduced last year into the House of Representatives, asking it to create the Illinois Media Literacy Task Force, on which we are asking a librarian to sit. And finally, we are always for open and free information exchange. If bills arise we will support proposals that call for net neutrality protections. And here's Diane to tell you more about that on the federal level.
Thank you so much, Derek. As you can see, we have our work cut out for us. And at these events, we have a real opportunity to do some relationship building and really bring home to our elected officials the value of what libraries offer our communities and their constituents and their voters. More on how we'll do that in a few minutes. And now, as Derek noted, I can go over what's happening on the federal level. We work closely with the American Library Association, which represents our interest in Washington, with help and support from state associations such as ILA, on the federal legislative priorities. You'll notice a common thread for both state and federal: library funding. I'm pleased to report that just recently, the federal 2020 full budget was approved following a series of continuing resolutions that kept the government open temporarily at 2019 funding levels. The 2020 budget includes a $10 million increase for the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which houses the Library Services and Technology Act, the source of the Grants to States program. The Grants to States program is a nice example of how the federal government and state governments work together. To qualify, states are required to provide a certain level of baseline state funding in order to receive federal funds. During the 2 years in which Illinois did not have a state budget, we suffered. We received only $4 million from LSTA in 2019 compared to a previous high of $5.5 million. In 2020, we're slated for $6 million. So kudos to Illinois for approving our own state budget. And thank you to our federal representatives who advocated for this in the current federal budget. We aren't resting on our laurels, however. It's not too early to begin advocating for the 2021 budget, preparation for which every year begins with a White House proposal. For the past few years, the White House proposals have included the complete elimination of IMLS, so we can't rest easy. Broadband, and as Derek mentioned before, net neutrality are both issues of primary concern to legislators and to libraries. According to the FCC, only 61% of rural Illinoisans have access to high-speed broadband at home, but 100% of libraries in Illinois do offer it. If members of Congress care about this, and the ones in Illinois most certainly do, this is a clear opportunity to demonstrate libraries' ability to help them achieve their goals for their constituents. Legislatively, ILA supports the Access Broadband Act, which is passed in the House and awaits action in the Senate. Net neutrality principles are at the core of libraries' mission to provide information without artificial barriers such as throttling or speeding up access to particular websites by internet service providers. Recently, a U.S. Court of Appeals held that the FCC's repeal of net neutrality protections could stand, but the Court of Appeals lifted a ban on states taking action. So as Derek noted earlier, there may be action in the Illinois General Assembly this year, and ILA remains strongly in support of protections for net neutrality. There are a few bills before Congress that address net neutrality issues as well. And legislatively, ILA supports the Save the Internet Act, also passed in the House and awaiting action in the Senate, and the Digital Equity Act, which has been introduced in the Senate by Illinois Senator Dick Durbin. Details about all of these are available on the ILA website. The Decennial Census 2020 opens on April 1st. Hopefully all of you have been hearing about the importance of libraries to ensuring a complete count. This is the first year the census is slated to be conducted primarily online, and for reasons cited earlier, libraries will be key. We're considered trusted community partners, and we expect people to come to the library to fill out their forms. There's a great deal of information posted on the ILA website and the ALA website about libraries and the census. Primary concerns among librarians are, number one, fear on the part of immigrant populations. There is no citizenship question on the census this time, and all residents, not citizens, are to be counted. Number two, we know households will be receiving a postcard with an identifier on it. If they come to the library without their identifier, can they still fill out the census? The answer is yes, they can be looked up by address. It's really, really important for everyone to be counted and for libraries to do their utmost to get out a complete count. Remember that LSTA funding we talked about earlier? That's dependent on state headcount. Illinois has in fact lost population over the past decade and stands to lose 1, perhaps 2 seats in Congress and electoral college votes. So this is of great importance to everyone in our state. ALA has also spearheaded the eBooks for All campaign, which you may have seen. This was in direct response to Macmillan's embargo to libraries of newly published ebooks. To date, nearly 250,000 readers nationwide have signed on to the eBooks for All campaign, and ALA is working with the House Committee on the Judiciary Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial, and Administrative Law to explore the issue and identify potential legislative solutions. Please stay tuned for those, which we will support, and visit the eBooks for All website for full details. So I realize we've thrown quite a bit at you. You aren't expected to have memorized all this information. We'll have it in print at the events, and this recording and documents are always accessible to you on the ILA website. So let's look ahead to what you can expect at a meetup. Some of you may be seasoned attendees of these events, and some may be first-time participants. No matter whether you've attended 10 or none, we want to be sure you're as prepared and ready as possible. First, the logistics. The schedule, full details, and registration information for all 8 events is available on the ILA website. We hope you've already registered for one, but if you haven't, we hope you'll consider it now. Before you go, first, look up your legislators. You could do that by address on the ILA website. Your legislator where you vote will probably be the most appropriate, but it's good to also take note of the legislators who serve your library or library district area where you work or serve as a trustee, since you serve their voters there. Here's how. Visit the ILA advocacy webpage. You'll see a bullet here to look up your state and federal elected officials. Click there and it leads you to a very simple form. You can look up your federal or your Illinois folks. When I fill it out, on the state side, it tells me that my state senator is John Cullerton, for the moment anyway, and that my state representative is Sarah Feigenholz. It's very easy. Next, check on the ILA website to see if they're planning to attend and at which meetup. There's a list linked from every individual event. If they're not listed as having RSVP'd, why not give them a call or send an email? It's much more effective for them to hear from their own constituents than from Chicago lobbyists like us. The person who answers the phone may not be the one who received the initial invitation and may not be aware of the event. That doesn't mean the legislator wasn't invited. ILA invites every state and federal legislator who serve anyone in the state of Illinois. If that happens, it's an opportunity for you to then say, I'm so glad I called. Here's the information. Next, look at your legislators' websites to see what their interests are. Veteran services, early childhood, technology. No matter what their interests are, there's no doubt there's some way your library serves them. Come up with some examples so you have something to talk about. Next, view the ILA legislative issues that we've just gone over a little bit today. We'll have them printed on the palm card at the events shown here and uploaded to the ILA website. There's also a webpage that we keep updated about state and federal legislative issues, again, hooked from the advocacy page on the ILA website. Again, try to tie one of these in to an example from your library. Here are a couple of examples of the type I'm talking about. These are both from real live Illinois libraries, and I know there are many more like these in your libraries. This doesn't have to be too difficult. You don't have to be polished lobbyists. That's what we're here for. You need to be prepared and just be yourselves. At the event, when you arrive, there'll be a check-in table and handouts to pick up. Tables are arranged by legislator. An ILA elected leader will make welcoming remarks, and Derek and I will go over the legislative agenda you've just heard about in a bit more detail. Some of the locations feature local speakers rather than or in addition to the legislative agenda, which is why we're giving you a preview here. Legislators will have an opportunity to make round-robin remarks, and there's informal mingling time while you're eating and getting seated. Please don't worry if your elected official, him or herself, isn't present, but a staffer is. Often it's the staff members who actually do the research on legislative issues and decide what lands on their bosses' desks, so it's extremely worthwhile to get to know them. This year, for the first time, we're going to be offering a photo area where you can get your picture taken with your legislator. After the event, a quick email of thanks, a follow-up to any question about the library or any additional information you promised to provide, or a copy of your photo, which you could tweet and hashtag if you're on social media, are all suitable messages following the event. Work with your library director to see about a good time to invite the legislator to visit the library. We know many do that already. Pictured here is U.S. Representative Rodney Davis visiting the Champaign Public Library. Looking ahead, there's yet another opportunity to advocate for libraries. ALA's National Library Legislative Day taking place in May in Washington, D.C. Illinois traditionally has one of the largest contingents at this annual May event, so we hope as many of you as possible will be able to join us. Look for announcements that have already appeared and will continue to appear in the ILA Alert e-newsletter and from ALA itself. Thank you for listening today and for spending time on library advocacy. We are stronger when we advocate together, and we hope this information has been helpful to you in your advocacy efforts, not only at the events we're talking about, but throughout the year. If anyone has any questions or concerns about anything, please do not hesitate to reach out to me here at ILA. Thank you so much.